welcome to our digital support group, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. First of all, I want to say happy National Eye Health Week to you all. Very, very exciting week for us, where we encourage everybody to go for regular sight tests. So you might see lots of kind of eye activity happening over this week. If you get a chance, go for your eye test when you can, if you haven't had one for a couple of years. Please encourage family, friends, children to go for their eye tests as well. That would be absolutely excellent. My name is Philippa Mason, and I'm the Development Manager for Scotland for Glaucoma UK. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our speaker, Professor James E. Morgan. Professor Morgan is a consultant ophthalmologist at University Hospital Wales and Professor of Ophthalmology at the University of Wales, Cardiff. Today, James will kindly be talking to us about his research at Cardiff Centre for Vision Science and will be telling us about his work on helping patients use glaucoma eye drops more effectively. Okay, as promised, just a wee bit of information about ourselves before we move on to talking to James. Glaucoma UK are the UK's only glaucoma-specific charity. We work in three main areas to prevent glaucoma sight loss. Firstly, we campaign to raise awareness of the disease. We want people to know what glaucoma is and also the importance of getting your eyes tested. The earlier glaucoma is diagnosed, the less likely people are to experience sight loss. Secondly, we provide support and advice to people with glaucoma and those who care for them. We have loads of information leaflets. We have a telephone helpline, a buddy service, and a patient forum. And we can also provide training and advice to professionals looking after people with glaucoma. Now, although we are a membership organisation and you can join Glaucoma UK and we welcome you with open arms, all our services are free to access. Okay, so you don't need to be a member to access our services. The final strand of our work is research. We fund research into the diagnosis, treatment, care and prevention of glaucoma. Now, we're a small charity, we don't have huge amounts of money, but we often provide initial funding for seed research, and that gets some early stage research going. Right, that's all I've got to say today. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our speaker, Professor James E. Morgan. Don't forget to post questions in the Q&A, and James, over to you.
Philippa, thank you very much, and thanks to you and Glaucoma UK for inviting me to talk about some of the work we're doing in Cardiff, but with collaborators around the UK. And I'd like to just echo your comments about Glaucoma UK and what a pivotal role it's played in bringing glaucoma centre stage in some areas of really important research, and really highlighting some of the successes we're achieving in glaucoma, and highlighting also some of the problems and to our politicians, reminding them that we need to continue to invest in eye care services. Now, the topic for this evening, and I stress I'm not going to set an exam at the end of this. I'm a professor, but the exams are off. There's no MCQ, multiple choice question at the end. This is really just to share with you and take away some of the mystique around research, and to explain why we do what we do and what drives us. And we're going to address this issue about, a question I'm often asked: are my drops working, doctor, or is it that I'm just not getting the drops in? If we just go to the next piece of the slide, and I'm always in a bit of a pickle here, because I know my patients are trying the best that they can, and there's this sort of sense almost of being in a confessional state and almost interrogating patients and saying, well, are you really getting them in? I don't know. I trust that you are. And one of the analogies I use, may not be the best, but it's one that seems to kind of understanding, is that we might all try and score a goal with our football, and it looks pretty straightforward, but we're not first division football players, all of us. And if you're like me with a football, you'll probably miss the goal altogether. And as the goalposts get smaller and smaller and recede into the distance, so the job just gets harder and harder. And this is what we're going to talk about. And a lot of it cuts across not just the drops, but it's the physicality of how you get them out of the bottle and how you remember to put them in. And I think it's also important to understand, why we need to put drops in or why we need to lower eye pressure. So I'm going to call out to Philippa just to crank through the slides. So Philippa, if we could just get the next slide, please. So let's just go back to basics. And this is a study from Professor Garway-Heath at Moorfields. And Professor Garway-Heath is funded in part by Glaucoma UK. So, and has done a lovely study published in 2015 in the Lancet with colleagues around the UK, asking a very basic question. The next click, please, Philippa. If we give drops or don't give drops, does this make any difference to the proportion of patients who are going to have progressive visual field loss? And Ted conducted this study, and it's what's called a placebo control study. What this means is that you're going to randomize patients using a computer algorithm to receive drops or not, or to receive effective drops, in other words, ones that contain medication, in this case, latanoprost, which is a commonly used glaucoma medication. Many of you, if you have glaucoma, have probably used it at some point in your care, against a placebo. And a placebo means that it looks and feels exactly like the active medication, but actually has no active component. So you take away all the variability associated with, say, the psychology of maybe my eye pressure is low because I've used an eye drop. So this is a very hard and tried testing situation for treatment versus no treatment. And the important finding is that at 2 years, they could show a significant difference between the rate of vision loss in patients who were treated with effective drops compared with those patients whose drops really contain no medication. And in the case of those where the drops had no effective medication, 25% of patients showed significant visual field progression over a 2-year period. And in fact, the difference was so marked that the data monitoring committee, the safety committee for this study, called a halt to the trial. So I think it's very persuasive evidence that we need to lower eye pressure. So next slide. So let's turn to our friends, the drops. There are many medications out there. We spend over £150 million a year on eye drops in one form or another, and they come in a variety of bottles. And as you no doubt have discovered, some are easy to use and very squeezable. The early xalatan bottles, latanoprost is the name of the drug. Xalatan is the trade name. Very squeezy, but then when you come up to some of the tougher plastic bottles, they're very hard to use. And the names are also confusing because the drugs have two names. They have the drug name that the company applies to the drug to differentiate themselves in the market. So Pharmacia or Pfizer, as it is became, have xalatan, but in reality we know that that's latanoprost. And then we know that actually it has another name. It's prostaglandin PGF2 alpha, which is the term that we use in the laboratory. So it's confusing for the doctors, it's confusing for the scientists, it's even more confusing for our patients. And in a clinical environment, in the rush of clinic, you'll be told in 5 minutes you've got to take one drop twice a day in the right eye and one drop 3 times a day in the left eye. And woe betide you if you ever get them muddled up. So it is confusing. I suppose the good side is that we do have medications and we know that they are effective. Next slide, please. There we go. So I'm just going to address some jargon and bust some jargon, and you may have heard these terms in relation to whether you do or in your attempts to use the drops. And the terminology that is thrown around is adherence versus compliance. Compliance is an old term, and really reflects what was seen as the passive behavior of a patient in relation to the doctor. I think that the best analogy is if you have somebody like James Robertson Justice as your consultant barking instructions at you that you must use the drop, and if you don't, you will be thrown out of the clinic. To use the drop is to be compliant with the barked instructions from your clinician. But I'm pleased to say, by and large, we've moved on from that, somewhat patronizing approach that I saw as a medical student, and that's really been rooted out through medical student training and is now in the clinic. And we see treatment now as very much an agreed plan to treat a condition. And so we set out a plan, and our patients hopefully will agree and take part as an active process and adhere to the agreed plan to improve their outcome and their well-being. So adherence now is a terminology that we use rather than compliance. So adherence is an agreement where patients and doctors work together to tackle a problem in common. Compliance is what in the past was seen as the doctor beating the poor old patient to achieve a goal, possibly for the patient's benefit or sometimes for the doctor's benefit. So thankfully that thing is well and truly in the past. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just cover a couple of studies here, and I'm going to step through them, at a slow pace. Starting off with a study that we published just last year and addressing some of these issues. As Philippa said, we're working in this area at the moment, and we're grateful to the research support of Glaucoma UK for some of this work. This work was supported by the Welsh NIHR funded pathway. And I acknowledge the lead author here, Heather Waterman, who was our professor of nursing, and also Simon Reed, a fantastic researcher who powered this study. And we wanted really to look at the frequency and the reliability with which patients were using drops. So as a doctor, I will prescribe drops as my colleagues will. And there is an element of trust and belief that those drops are used, but we really have no knowledge that that's the case. Just as when one goes to the dentist, I'm sure, like me, you busily brush your teeth on the day of your tooth inspections. So I suspect the frequency with which drops are used increases just before the clinic. Sometimes, conversely, it's the other way around, that there's a perception that to get an accurate measurement of the pressure, the drop should be stopped on a day or two before clinic. And I've lost count of the number of times that I've had to explain to one of my poor patients, no, the idea is that you take the drops the day before the clinic, or indeed on the day of the clinic in the morning as you come in. We wanted to know whether patients were using drops, and to do this we use a device called a MEMS device, and that little bottle that you see down on the left hand side of the slide is a screw top bottle, and when the screw top is released and the container holds the eye drop, a computer chip in the bottle will record the act of unscrewing and provide us with a surrogate estimate that the drop was actually used. We don't know whether the drop went in the eye, but we know that there was an attempt to instill the drop. Now, it turns out that we found that the eye pressure reduction of greater than 15%, which is a reasonable benchmark for eye drops, occurred in a substantial proportion of our patients, 83 out of 92 eyes by the final study visit. In this particular study, we also had nurses instill the drops on the day of clinic, so we were able to determine whether the drop itself was effective and not just whether it was a case of the drop not going in. And we were interested to find that the non-response rate, in other words, the drop going into the eye, and this was a latanoprost drop, was not effective in 5% of patients, even though we knew the drop had gone into the eye. It did not reduce the eye pressure. And then we could take the numbers from this bottle and see what the profiles were for drop installation, and they're really quite illuminating. So let's have a look at how patients are using the drop, and this is a clinic in Cardiff, which I think is reasonably representative of many busy glaucoma clinics. So next slide, please, Philippa. So here is the installation as a percentage of all use, and actually our patients were pretty good. Now, I hope that that's not because I instill some fear in my patients. I hope it is because of an agreed action plan, but over 70% use the drops as required. But we found that 10% used them too much. Well, perhaps that's not a bad thing. At least the drops are going in. But more concerning, about 18% of patients were not instilling the drops at all. So let's have a look at a couple of typical cases now, patient profiles. So if we just move on to the next slide. So those little bottles plug into a computer, and the computer plugs into a statistics package. And this allows us to plot over a prolonged period of time, weeks, the time of day at which the drops were used. Now, this is supposed to be an evening drop, and each dot on this calendar plot shows for this particular patient when the drop was used, or at least when the bottle was opened and the drop was taken out. So you can see that there are 2 dots there, which are around 8 or 9 in the morning, and then about 11:30. So the drop was forgotten and then remembered. And then at 11 o'clock at night, the patient is very reliable in putting the drops in, but a little bit of variation, and interestingly going over midnight and into the early hours of the morning. And there are some interesting stories that come out of this. Some patients would routinely use their drops at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's when they got in from the pub. So patients work the drops in around their lifestyle, and that's absolutely fine. We're just looking for regularity here. So let's have a look at another profile now. So this patient is amazing. It's like a Swiss clock, taking their drops within half an hour every day, and just forgotten on 2 occasions. We're not quite sure why, or in fact, actually, some extra diligence, are not just forgotten, they're actually taken twice on those days, just to make sure. So this patient is hyper vigilant and really very careful with the drop installation. So let's have a look at the final example now as a sort of patient. Well, this patient really just takes the drop on the day before clinic. So we might get a pressure reduction, but in fact, the patient and the doctor are kidding themselves really, because we might get a low pressure and then wonder later why the glaucoma is progressing. And that results in a very interesting scenario where the natural behavior of the doctor is to add another drop. Well, in fact, that's the last thing you want to do in this patient, because they're not using the drops at all, and they're even less likely to use another drop when they have to take 2 drops. Then they just have increased risks of side effects and will not take the medication. But in clinic, if the drops are taken just the day before clinic, you will still get the perception that the pressure is controlled during the whole cycle, the whole month, the months leading up to the clinic appointment, and yet the glaucoma will progress. So this is quite a challenge at the moment. So there's a message from. I'm just. Okay, sorry. There's. I'll speak up just in case somebody can't hear me, but it may be technical if people can't hear. So next slide, please, Philippa. So what are we going to do to help everybody? And so I'm going to address some of the technologies that have been brought into play to see if we can help patients instill the drops, because we know they're very hard, and whether we can apply some of the technology that's around to counter drops. So let's have a look at another study. This was from Manchester Royal Eye Hospital by AGIT with David Henson, senior optometrist up there. And they plotted the percentage of adherence. So this is whether the patients are giving the drop according to plan against the patient's perception that they're missing drops. And there's actually a pretty good relationship. It's not completely tight, but if patients say that they're missing drops, then in fact, they probably are. And actually, when they looked at the distribution of drops being instilled, if you look at that plot on the right-hand side, you can see that you get 100% adherence in a few patients, but by and large, there's a bit of scatter, and quite a lot of the drops are missed, and some patients are just using their drops 40 or 50% of the time. Now, this is not unusual for glaucoma. In fact, if we look right across medication adherence, we find it's about 50% for the population as a whole. So it's a major medical challenge for all doctors and patients alike. Next slide, please. So what are the factors that we need to address? And this is from a survey by Davis. It's an American survey, but I think highlights some of the advantages we have working in the NHS and some of the common challenges that we have really across the globe and across the Western eye care in particular. First up, we've got to get the medication. Now, I'm always pleased to say that medication is by and large free in the NHS. It depends on which nation you're in. In Wales and Scotland, the patients do not pay for the medication. There are moderate charges in England in some cases, but the ability to obtain medication is actually not a barrier to adherence. And we pay a lot less for medications in the UK than they do in the US. So to take latanoprost, for example, in the US, typically you would pay 3 to 4 times as much in their system as you would in the UK. Then we have the common problems of instilling a drop every day. So we have to remember that the drops need to be instilled. We also need to get the drops into the eye. So that's very much the goal mouth, trying to score the goal with the football, getting it into the right place. And then even if we remember to take the drop, knowing that it has to be taken at a particular time of the day so that it's you're getting an even profile of drop installation and not having a sort of stop-start, peak and trough administration of drug, which can be a real problem and isn't very effective for controlling the eye pressure. So next slide, please. So just to summarize some of the factors, and we're going to talk about success because I see this as a common goal. We're doing this together in partnership. Age is a factor, and age is a factor because as you get older, as we all find, it's harder to remember things and it's easy to get lost in some of the technology. Educational level is I'm afraid still a factor. We find that higher educational attainment is associated with higher adherence. Then there's just mechanical things. As one gets older and the population with glaucoma is generally on the older end of the scale, grip power goes down. So it's actually more difficult to squeeze the bottles to get the drops out. Glaucoma severity is a factor. So if your eyesight is poor from glaucoma, it's actually difficult to see the bottles. It's difficult to find the bottles. It's difficult to read your diary. And there is an association with glaucoma severity and there's a cognitive impact of diminished vision, as well as just the cognitive effects. In other words, the forgetfulness, and in some patients going on to Alzheimer's, which can be a particular problem if you don't have good, strong family or social support. And finally, there's just the human factor of motivation. One of the problems about with glaucoma is that it is by and large, in its early stages, asymptomatic. What that means is you don't see huge areas of vision loss. And when you do, you really are in the late stages of glaucoma, and then it becomes a huge problem. So glaucoma is very much in the same area as the treatment of blood pressure or the treatment of cholesterol, treatment of these chronic conditions, which if unattended can have severe effects. So we treat blood pressure to make sure we don't have heart attacks and strokes. By the time we've had a heart attack and stroke, it's really too late. And glaucoma is the same. So you want to treat glaucoma when it's asymptomatic. And I see a success, a patient where glaucoma just isn't a problem, and my patients are still asking the question, do I need to take these drops because glaucoma isn't an issue? And that is a measure of success. We don't want patients coming in saying, I'm losing vision. It's really becoming a problem. I can't see my bottles to instill my eye drops. Next slide, please. So let's move on to some of the technical solutions now that have really starting to be thrown around. So this is something we've looked at, but it's actually, I'm reporting some data from a group in San Diego, Aguilar Riviera, and with Todd Coleman's group from bioengineering in the University of San Diego. And a number of groups are looking at these technologies, and basically chips are now so small, and this is a huge chip. This is a 2mm chip which sticks on the bottom of a bottle, and you can see that little red tab is actually a resistance strip that is wrapped around the bottle, and when the patient squeezes the bottle, the act of squeezing is then recorded on the chip, and these chips can record quite a lot of information. One of the goals of this technology is to use printable electronics that will fit into a piece of paper and develop smart labels that can just be stuck onto any bottle. We're not there yet, because there are issues with batteries and power supplies, but I think over the next 10 to 15 years, I can see this technology maturing. You've probably seen it already in the shops when there are radio frequency tags that are attached to products, and if you forget to pay and take something out of a shop, an alarm will go off. And it's the same sort of technology that's being applied here, but it's very exciting to see this come out, and I'm also pleased to say we're working in the same area, and I think it has great promise. One of the issues it raises, though, is all this technology is a bit spooky. If you're given a bottle that has an electronic tab on it and something that's going to monitor what you do, you effectively have a little spy bottle in your bag. And I think this leads us into an uncomfortable area as to how much information should we expect patients to share with us for the benefit of glaucoma. We work a lot in developing computers and stuff for glaucoma, and I am myself a little spooked at how much information you can glean from these devices with a bit of mathematics and an algorithm. So it's something that we need to look at, and it's something that really organizations such as Glaucoma UK can play a leading role in forming the bridge between patients and scientists and clinicians in trying to get the best outcomes in the application of technology. So we want to get away from this idea of spying, but we want to also share the idea that this information has great value and can be very beneficial. Next slide, please. I mentioned that grip is an issue, and with technology we can easily measure grip power, and you would be surprised that actually some of the bottles require greater pinch strength or grip strength than is achievable. There's a huge range in the amount of force. Vertically, a 7-fold range has been reported by Moore et al., a 4-fold range for horizontal squeezing, and the range of power required to squeeze a bottle, the next slide please, can actually exceed the range of power that patients can deliver. Now, fortunately, most patients should be able to squeeze a bottle, but there are particular patients, and these hands show some of the conditions that can limit your ability to squeeze a bottle. The top image is from somebody with osteoarthritis, which is a very common condition. And the lower slide is from somebody with rheumatoid arthritis. And both of these are nasty degenerative joint conditions which severely limit your ability to pinch and squeeze a bottle. So I'm always surprised when some of my doctors are handing out bottles to patients with severe rheumatoid arthritis. And I will say, well, you really need to ask if there's a family member or a nurse who can visit to put the drops in, because in reality, patients will not be able to install the drops. I'm also amazed because sometimes patients with rheumatoid arthritis figure things out and develop complicated apparatus to install the drops. So human ingenuity never fails to amaze me, but it's something that we need as doctors to be constantly aware of. Next slide, please. So to help our patients, again, there are lots of gadgets. So these are just mechanical gadgets. So I showed the Alcon device. Sadly, that's no longer in production. But if you look on the Glaucoma UK site, you will see the Santen and the TEA drop aids. The Santen is a pharmaceutical company which supplies preservative-free drops. So they come in these little sachets, and these little squeezers are very nice. And the TEA one is similar, and it provides an eye cup which allows you to aim the drop over your eye. Some devices, I think, are probably a bit ambitious. So the mirror hat, where you have a mirror that attaches to your baseball hat, is actually, not surprisingly, an American solution, and I'm not sure would map well to the UK population. But you get a sense of the inventiveness that's being applied to this area, and also that there remains some unmet need. We're working on a device that's a little bit like the Alcon device, but I'm not showing it today since it's still something in prototype stage, but something that's being supported by Glaucoma UK. We're very grateful for that. Next slide, please. I mentioned the difference between compliance and adherence, and it really is one of collaboration. Now, if any of my patients are in the audience, or if you're in Scotland or Moorfields, you will have come across something called Open Eyes, which is the new electronic patient record for eye care, which is going to be the national platform for Wales and Scotland, and also for Moorfields and other hospitals. Other electronic records are, of course, available. But Open Eyes, I just showed this little screenshot, and it looks unintelligible, but basically the top line, those little green bars, show the intervals of application of the drops, but the dots at the bottom are the ones that are interesting. This is a compliance plot for a patient taken over a few days. Now, you can see the dotted line that runs horizontally, and that is when the drops should be put in, but you can see that the patient has been a bit scatty in applying the drops at all hours of the day. Next slide, please. And in reality, this is how they should apply the drops if they're a little bit late in putting them in, but they should be around a center point in the day to be reliable. And the importance of these screens and screens similar to this is that we can share them in a glaucoma clinic and show you why we do what we do, or why we suggest a path of action. So to say, look, the drops are going in, but maybe they could go in more regularly. The drops are not producing the pressure reduction that we like, and we can also show whether the visual field or the vision is generally going down. So I find these screens very powerful way of sharing glaucoma progression with my patients. Next slide. Here's another example. The top green line, which is going up and down, is actually a pressure profile, and the vertical line show that the patients had a trabeculectomy, cataract extraction, and various laser treatments. You can see that we are handling a lot of data now. So, and I just show this to show that we're not making things up. There's a hard set of data now which is underpinning our decisions. And I think one of the problems we've got to overcome in addressing things like adherence is also sharing with our patients why we do things, why we might recommend an operation, or why we might not recommend an operation, or why we might let the glaucoma drift a little bit, because at the end of the day, my task as a clinician is not to inflict needless operations. It's actually to hold back from operations and do as little as I need to do to preserve the vision for as long as possible. Next slide, please. So what lies in the future? Well, let's have a look, and just to relieve you, this is the last slide. But just to summarize, drops work, and we forget that we have many effective drops. We have many drops that are now available in preservative-free formulations. We have preservative-free formulations that come from your standard droppers, not just from the tiny little sachets, and the standard droppers are much easier to use. I haven't talked about one of the very exciting developments, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is selective laser trabeculoplasty. The LIGHT trial from Professor Gazard's group in Moorfields shows that it is effective. We sort of knew that because laser trabeculoplasty has been around since the 1970s. The appeal of SLT, selective laser trabeculoplasty, is that it can be repeated. And you may wonder why I'm not pushing this forward. I think the issue is that we need a little bit more data at the moment to match the data that we have for the drops to show that SLT delivers a lower rate of visual field deterioration. And there is certainly some data in the light trial for that, but I think it would be good to see more data. And one of the reasons for that is that I've been using SLT and ALT since the 1980s, and it has a defined failure rate at year 1, year 2, year 3. That's fine. One of the problems we have at the moment is picking up the failures. We have to make sure that patients are getting regular follow-ups. And as you all know from COVID, that's become a bit of a challenge. And what we don't want is patients who've been successfully treated by SLT going off for 2 or 3 years thinking that glaucoma is cured, only to come back at, say, year 4 with very high pressures and advanced vision loss. And I think there's less of a risk of that with the drops. So I think there's going to be some change here in rebalancing our use of drops and laser, but it's something where we need to focus our efforts. I stress again that the fact that we're just talking over Zoom is a reminder that there's been a technological revolution, and possibly one of the good things out of COVID is that everybody's on Zoom. We've seen a big step forward in the introduction of electronic records and using some of the data platforms that we have on things like Facebook and using browsers and things like that. Excuse me. And finally, I think, I hope you remember this term adherence and the fact that this is a collaborative goal, that this isn't an interrogation of a doctor with his patients. This is a shared and agreed goal to ensure that drops can go in, that we're there to provide these supportive processes to ensure that the drops are effective. So I'm going to end there. Happy to take any questions that come through on the chat, and Philippa and Elena can pick those up.
Okay, I'm coming back in now. You can hear me okay here, James, can't you? I'm hoping.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful, James. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I've had lots of questions in, so if it's okay, I'm going to start with one, go straight in with one off Facebook, which is really interesting, kind of a question and a comment, really. And this is saying, can I suggest that someone finds a way for people with arthritic hands or broken arms to open those tiny bottles, which when faced with fingers unable to grip are near impossible to open without help? So we often focus on the grip, don't we? And actually a lot of patients
I think that, you know, that's just a brilliant suggestion. And I have, I mean, we have jam jar openers, which are wonderful. And I use them myself, actually, for those tightly screwed on bits of marmalade. But they don't work on drop bottles. No. And of course, they have a snap contact. In fact, I've got one here. So if you have those little serrated edges and you have to break them, and they require a lot of force. So I think that's a great suggestion, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there are some, now this is something that Glaucoma UK have been looking into. Glaucoma UK provides lots of advice on dispensing aids, which may help people use their eye drops more effectively. And one of the things that our helpline team have been looking at is that issue, and whether there's anything on the market at the moment. And they found a few things, but I don't think they're at a point where we feel that we can recommend anything yet. But one
thing we've done, we're doing, and I've got the prototype here, but I won't show it. But we're using 3D printing, which allows us to basically computer design these solutions. So we could just go to the drawing board and build one of these things, and they're printed. It's amazing. The computer plans are checked in New York. The 3D printers are in Holland. They arrive by DHL 5 days later, and we have a prototype. And it's not something, these are things you can take into the clinic. So we're just blown away by that. So these ideas we can translate into products and test them with our patients. So I'm going to take that away, actually.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Thank you. I've got something that came in nice and early here, but this is somebody's particular situation, and just talking about some of the complexities, I think, of people as individuals who have glaucoma and are trying to take medications. And somebody says here, my mum's 92, with wide angle glaucoma, lots of problems getting them in, arthritic hands. She's tried the plastic helpers, but they're too big and clunky. Also, the nozzles, She's worried about touching the nozzles and is frightened of damaging her eye. Also, there's problems with the packaging, which she often goes by colours. And if the packaging colour changes, we often get called up about that. She gets confused. She also has difficulty reading the labels. So I think this is telling us about how it's multi. The problems aren't singular, are they often?
Well, I think there's some, and again, this is, there may be some great design work that we can do here where we just say, like, we just standardize the colors on the bottle. So you know it's a Tanapros by a particular tone. You have to pick them very carefully, the patients who've got cataract. But if these are issues that you can pick up in Glaucoma UK, we can take the science and there are particular RAL charts and things that we can apply to get the right color tones. If this is, I mean, I think one of the things is we've got to listen to our patients. It's not us preaching from some pulpit of technology, because it's not about us, it's about patients. So yeah, that's one to think about, actually. I hadn't thought of color coding.
I've got one here as well, very similar. If patient leaflets are in larger print, we often see, patient leaflets that come with eye drops are in very, very small print, which make it very difficult to read. And each type of eye drop had distinctive colours and shaped tops. That would also be really helpful. Thank you very much. That came in on Zoom. People are great. I think you should invite all these people along to a user group. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Really useful stuff. Okay, I've got some questions about drops, kind of still quite useful for most people, but kind of maybe, I suppose, wider drop questions. I've got here, if you are prescribed drops twice a day, or is this about timing? If you have prescribed drops twice a day, should you have it at 12-hour intervals exactly? This can sometimes be difficult if you have to travel or go somewhere.
Ideally, if we were in a laboratory, yes, but I mean, we've got to be reasonable as close as you can. But life is for living and not for adherence. We want adherence, but we've got to be realistic. And I'm not sure I take an increasingly relaxed view of glaucoma. Now that we have more data on patients and more technology, it's giving us greater wiggle room to be less strict about pressure control. And that's a difficult thing to explain. If you saw on that first graph from the United Kingdom glaucoma treatment study, both treated and untreated progressed. And that's fine, because actually, in some respects, we're all suffering from glaucoma because we're all getting older. And our job is to put the brakes on things so that it doesn't affect your quality of life. You can still drive, still see the grandchildren, still go on holiday and do all those things. And you don't need to worry about your optic nerves. That's for us to worry about. That's our job.
That's wonderful, thank you. Someone here about another kind of drop related. It's about how can I minimise the side effects from drops, particularly dry eyes? And this person uses Timolol. They use a preservative-free already, but that would have been one of the things perhaps to swap to a preservative-free.
Now that's difficult, and in some respects, there isn't really a solution to that. You can change the drops. I mean, as you know, the systemic side effect issue with you just press on the corner of your eye to stop them draining straight down the tear canal is one thing, but that doesn't treat the dry eye condition or the topical local inflammation. There are artificial tears that you can use, but it's sort of bad medicine to have another medicine to make one medicine tolerable. And in those cases, I would argue it's reasonable to have the discussion. If after a few weeks of this, you're just not getting on, to say, look, maybe SLT or something like that, a non-drop approach is something to be used. And we are thinking of bringing SLT further forward based on the work from Moorfield. And I think that's very valid. But I think there are other beta blockers that you can try. What's not necessarily known is preservatives actually enhance the efficacy of some of the drops. So it's not just about preventing bacterial growth. The preservatives break down the outer membranes of the eye and actually enhance the penetration of some of the drugs. So the relationship with some of the preservatives, which are mildly toxic, is complex. this is the classic one is BAC, benzalkonium chloride, which you'll see on the bottles. And the ones that are preservative free sometimes have something that's like BAC. You know, I always say that if a medication is powerful, it can have a powerful side effect. A mild medication has a mild side effect. You can never get away from that.
No, absolutely. James, do you want a glass of water? I'm so sorry.
I'm just going to get a glass while you collect the questions.
Absolutely right. Please do. Thank you. It's always best to give our speakers a comfort break. Otherwise, we don't want to lose them halfway through. It's most important. I've got some wonderful questions from you all. Thank you so much tonight. You're all writing lots and lots of exciting stuff down. I'm just looking here to see if there's anything that I can cover while we're talking. I would suggest if there's anything that's very, very specific to you in terms of you take a certain amount of drops, or you take a certain amount of this drop, and if it's something that's very specific to you, you call our helpline and they'll be able to offer more one-to-one advice. Michelle, I've got a question from you here. Oh, brilliant. Hello back. I've just got a question from Michelle, which I think we should be able to cover, but it says, how do I know what type of glaucoma I have? Now, this will be something that your consultant, when you're diagnosed with glaucoma, that your consultant should tell you right at the beginning, so you know which type you have. If you've got any, when you know what type you have, we have loads of information on the Glaucoma UK website about different types of glaucoma. Okay, so when you know what it's called, you can then have a look at it and get more information about it. But that will be something that your consultant will tell you. Okay, thank you. Thanks, James. Is that better now? That's feeling a little bit.
Yeah, better. So, and one of the things we're looking at, by the way, with Moorfields and Peter Thomas, who's the digital director at Moorfields, is digitally reaching out to our patients. So one of the things that's coming at us in the next sort of 5 to 10 years is where patients can get a view of their records. You'll have heard about this on the press, and you'll see it with some of the GP records and things like patient knows best. And there's an idea now which we're pushing, which is that you can see your record, which will be a digest of what you've got, which will address that issue. I just see no point in patients not being able to look on their mobile phone and say, well, I've got open angle glaucoma, I should be on this drop and that drop, and these are the side effects. And I can also report my side effects on the mobile phone. And I'm pleased to say these things are now being actively discussed. They're not, and they're close to being, the technology is going to be implemented in the next few years. So I think that's going to address some of these issues.
That's absolutely true. That's wonderful. It's amazing what's on the horizon. Thank goodness. I've got another one from Facebook here. Just keeping an eye here. It's actually a suggestion. It says all glaucoma medication must be dispensed in transparent bottles so the patient will not shake and check whether the solution is in there or not and may miss the next dose. Just a suggestion. So I think it's about, yes, making it more transparent so people can see what's left, I think. Possibly,
but the light, you can get light damage for some of the chemicals. So there is an argument for some of them being in semi-opaque. But the drops, actually, some of the drops, they just look like cheap plastic bottles. I know one of the companies, and I'm sure more than one company, have spent millions of dollars on making sure that the bottles meet a particular specification. They're not trivial bits of engineering, actually. I was surprised to learn that from industry sources.
It often surprises me. This is one of the things that I kind of was amazed at. And you look at the production from product kind of idea through all the way through the processes and the testing. I mean, I don't know how long it takes to get from kind of initial stages through to kind of testing and out. And a lot of them don't make it, don't they? A lot of the ideas that they put forward.
I've seen it. So I've seen other ones. There was a thing called a Xallies, which was a horizontal thing that used to shoot drops into the eyes. And one company spent millions of dollars on that and then just binned it before it went into what we call production, where it's mass produced, because the business model wasn't there. When we've looked in the lab and just pressed the bottles, they dispense, you know, a good bottle will dispense 50 microliters, which is a very small volume, again and again and again as an engineered dose. They're quite impressive.
Absolutely. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? And absolutely, you know, seeing something going through from those kind of ideas through to production and millions of pounds being spent on things and then never actually coming into fruition. That's most products don't go into fruition, do they? I think that's
sadly, a good idea will hit business reality, and You know, for better or worse, the companies have to return a profit.
Yeah.
And people have to take, and stuff has to be done at volume. You can't, 100 units is not enough. They've got to produce tens of thousands of units to bring the cost down. I think, I think there's going to be some movement in this area. I think, you know, the electronics, the digital, the fabrication, the fact that we can rapidly prototype now. I mean, what we can do, and I've shown you guys at Glaucoma some of our prototypes. We can just think of a prototype, to design it on a computer, print it the following day, and then a patient can play with it.
It's wonderful. I mean, it's amazing how quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I've got a few questions here, which maybe they're coming through to the helpline. One's about when someone takes their drops in the morning, by the evening and afternoon, their eyes are very irritable. Is it better for them to take them in the evening? I mean, there's something about what time we take drops. You know,
I'm pretty easy about that. I think as long as you take it once a day, it can be morning or evening, depending on. And some people like to sleep on the drops and close their eyes, and I think that's absolutely fine. The way the drops use, particularly the prostaglandins, is quite complicated. They turn on some enzymes in the eye that makes the eye a little bit leaky. So it's different from, say, beta blockers, which work in more sort of classic receptor-based ways.
And we've got someone here who's talking about, they're saying, do you recommend pinching the eye by the nose right after taking the drop? So I think they're talking about punctal occlusion here.
Yeah, punctal occlusion. Yeah, not pinching the eye, but just that little bit of gristle you feel on the corner of your eye. If you just at the base of the nose, if you press that, that stops it going down your nasal passages, and that goes direct into the bloodstream. So that's sort of relevant for things like beta blockers, or if you're taking things like brimonidine or Simbrinza. So that can be a particularly powerful drug that can upset some people. So yeah, it's a good idea, but it's fiddly. I mean, you've got to do this, you've got to do this, and one of the funniest things in the Morgan household was when I had to take some drops for episcleritis, and my wife, who's a psychiatrist, observed me putting the drops in, and I was hopeless.
Well, this is it.
The reason is I'm very good at putting it in the patient's eye, which is looking at somebody. When I have to reverse and do it like this, it's like trying to tie a tie backwards. And it just dawned on me, and this is why we got into this thing. I just thought, gosh, I thought I'd be quite good at this. And it's very, very hard.
It is indeed. I think there's an assumption as well that eye drops are relatively easy to put in. So I think there's this kind of assumption of people thinking, well, I should be able to just do it. Most people can just do it. I mean, I should be able to. And I think that people feel a bit embarrassed if they feel they're not doing it. But what I'd always suggest to people, I'm sure you'd agree, James, is to, if you're worried at all that your eye drops aren't going in, to talk to your consultant, to talk to the person that tests the pressure of your eyes, and they'll tell you whether the effectiveness is happening, won't they?
Now you can talk to your optician. Opticians are very good at this, and sometimes less pressured than the eye clinics. I mean, one of the downsides of COVID is the pressures on the eye service at the moment. There is a real, everybody's a bit tired, and there's a sense we've got a year to catch up and try and get back to some sort of normality. And I hope people still have the time to talk to patients. I mean, we're pushing the digital platforms because that gives you space to talk to a patient. You're not spending your time rifling through bits of paper. Everything's there in one go, and that gives me 10 minutes to talk about somebody or just to listen to what's going on. I think the other thing sometimes with these devices is, if you think about it, you might go out from in the evening or something, and then you have to assemble your compliance device, which looks like the Eiffel Tower. You sort of build this thing, and you were hoping you could have a discreet drop, and now you've got something the size of a pepper grinder near your eye. And this is something that people sort of, you've got to be sensitive to this. You don't want to advertise. You want to be discreet. It's got to be easy. It's tough.
Absolutely, it's definitely more complicated, isn't it, than we kind of, you would maybe think about initially. So I can't believe we've still got questions coming in, but we are almost out of time. What I'm going to do is just say to the people, if I haven't had a chance, what I've done is there's some more general questions that have come into the Q&A. Thank you all for putting your questions in. If I haven't got round to your question today, don't worry. Either you can phone our helpline or you can email us with that question. And I guarantee we know the answer to it. All of the ones that have come in, we will be able to answer. So please just put it to our team and we'll be able to help. Okay, what I want to do quickly is put up my slide here, just so you can see the helpline details. Here we go. Let me just move this one forward. Right, okay. On the screen here, you will see some more information about Glaucoma UK. This is our helpline details. That's the telephone number. And you can also email us at helpline@glaucoma.uk. And the office is open between Monday and Friday from 9:30 till 5 p.m. And you can ask us any questions about glaucoma. As I said, no questions are too silly. Phone up, we get them all. So anything is absolutely great. I'm going to tell you about some of the talks that we've got coming up in the next few weeks. We have one on the 7th of October about laser treatment for glaucoma. This came up following the public actually coming back to us and telling us they wanted to know about it. So we're going to talk about that. Then we've got one called Who Can Help If I'm Losing My Sight? So if you are losing sight due to glaucoma, or you have questions about what services are available if you're losing sight, please come along to that one. Then we've got something called Self-Care Glaucoma Eye Drops. And that's a great session for all those lovely little specific questions about eye drops. It's more like a meeting, and we'll have a helpline advisor, and she'll be able to tell you lots of hints and tricks and techniques for being able to do your eye drops. Then we've got some glaucoma-friendly yoga sessions, which is a new thing for us, at limited spaces, so please sign up for that. And then we have a session on the 30th of November called Glaucoma and Cataracts, and we'd love to see you there, or at any of those, so please do come along to any of those. It just kind of leaves me to say at this point, James, thank you so much for giving up an hour this evening to talk to us. I really appreciate you coming. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I had about 50 of you in, so I'm absolutely chuffed. Thank you so much. As I said, phone the helpline if you've got any questions. Can I just wish you all a good evening and a good week, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Philippa.
Thanks.
Great evening.
Thank you.